Hmm.
It's been lovely chatting. Oops.
I just ducked out briefly, but Stephen's here.
Hi there.
And yeah, Catherine,
Sorry
if
to be
you want to
late. Had
host,
some challenges getting connected.
yeah, absolutely, no worries. I'm just going to wrap up me being on this call, and then you can take it away, Stephen. Catherine, if you want to chat with Stephen until everything is sorted, and we can figure things
Sure.
out from there.
In fact, maybe I should introduce Stephen to Aslan, since I know both
Yeah.
of you. Okay. Thank you, Q. Hello, Stephen. How are you? He will.
I'm great, thanks. I'm not sure what's going on here, though.
No, you are in.
I'm flexible and easy. I had understood that I was gonna be interviewed by somebody for a while. Is that what's gonna happen, or do you want me to just sing?
No, I can answer that for the group. No, we don't necessarily look to you for musical entertainment in this hour, although, you know, you could persuade us. But no, my role here is very simple. I wanted to say hi, and I've done that. And I wanted to introduce you to my dear friend Aslan Thomas, another Nova Scotian. This is the Nova Scotia moment, a proud moment in the filibuster. And Aslan will tell you about herself, and then she will very graciously bombard you with questions. No, she will engage you in conversation. She won't do the Carol off. She will do the Aslan Thomas. Okay. So, and Aslan Steve is another very dear friend, a long-time soldier in the movement for disability rights, and especially for the passage and signing of the CRPD. Steve was not just in the room, but he was in all of the back rooms for a very long time. So he has an extraordinary history to share with us on this day, which, in addition to being the day when we might see a brand new and horribly wrongful medical assistance in dying law, we will also celebrate the 11th anniversary of Canada's signing of the CRPD. So how's that for irony? Anyway, I hand it over to you two. It's going to be an amazing conversation. I hope that people are getting comfortable on the live stream, because this is a part of our history that is uniquely Canadian, and that we have very privileged access to the real story of what it took to build that masterful convention. Okay, I'm going to be quiet and I'll go off camera, but I'm listening to every word.
Hi, Steve. It's such a pleasure to meet you. I'm Aslan, and I'm in Unama'ki, or Cape Breton Island. I'm in Mabu right now, and I have a lot. Sorry, I'm just trying to think of where to start. But I do believe.
Before we go on, Aslan, can I make a suggestion? Could you turn on the captioning at your end? Because there's a really significant delay, and it would just help our conversational flow if you can see that as well, okay? It's at the bottom, there are little icons. Click the CC one that says closed caption, and you can pretend you're hearing impaired like me.
So I don't see that.
I am working on it right now.
If it's not going to work, don't sweat it. It's just an idea.
Nope. Okay. I am.
Just be patient with me then, okay?
Okay.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah.
Fabulous.
So where are you in
Okay.
Cape Breton?
I'm in Mabu. That's Mabou.
You're in Mabu? Yeah. I'm in Bedak, just down the road. Yeah.
My
Yeah.
partner works at L'Arche Cape Breton. I'll put that in the chat.
Oh, really? Okay. I'm on the board of L'Arche in Halifax.
Oh, nice,
Mm,
nice.
yeah. Been a long time friend of L'Arche. So I'm in your hands here. My understanding is we've got a couple of hours. You and I are going to chat for a while, and then a couple of lawyer friends of mine are going to join us in about, well, 45 minutes now, I think, or maybe talk a bit more about some of the technical connections between the CRPD and Bill CH7. Is that your understanding of things too?
Excellent. You know what? You just filled me in. I'm now in the loop, so this is good.
Okay. Not a moment too soon, I'd say. It's just what's called making it up as we go along.
That's right. That's the name of the game today, I suppose. So I have a lot of different things I want to ask you, and one of them is just a personal curiosity I have. Like I recently became, actually I'm going to hold off on that because I'm not remembering the name that I want to remember right now. So I might look that up in a minute, but I'm just curious, what are your thoughts today on the anniversary of the signing of the CRPD?
Well, there are two things that happen with UN human rights conventions. First of all, the country signed it, and that indicates that they're interested in it and want to consider it more carefully. And once they've done that and they feel that they're in compliance, then they ratify the convention. So we signed the convention in 2007 with about 80 other countries on the day it opened for signature in the UN. And between 2007 and 2010, the Canadian disability rights community worked very hard to get the government to ratify the convention because there was a lot of resistance to it, because the government of the day wasn't particularly keen about getting more engaged with UN treaties and things. But finally, on March 11th of 2010, Canada's foreign minister at the time, Mr. Lawrence Cannon, and a small group of disability rights activists like myself and Tracy Walters, who was the executive director of IL Canada at the time, and a woman who was chair of the board of what was called the Canadian Association of Community Living in those days. Her name is Bendina, and I don't recall her last name, and also a staff person from CACL, Anna McQuarrie, who, like me, was quite involved in drafting the convention. We went to New York that day because there's official documents that a country has to give to the UN when they ratify a treaty. And the way that goes is that the ambassador from the country or the foreign minister travels to the United Nations and meets with the Secretary General in a formal ceremony and gives him a big piece of paper and says, we've ratified the convention. So that's what happened on March 11th in 2010 in Ban Ki-moon's office at the UN.
And, you know, please forgive my ignorance, but because I don't know a lot about what it means for Canada to be a signatory. Does this have more than just symbolic value? Like, does the ratification or the signing of the CRPD, what does that mean? What change has that made in the lives of people with disabilities in Canada?
Well, it depends on who you ask, I'd say. Like much of things, like a lot of things. But for me, as somebody who's been involved with the work around the Disability Convention for 20 years, I would argue that it does have more than a symbolic significance. But it's not, a UN human rights treaty is not the same as Canadian law. It's not the same as the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It has a kind of a moral force, if you will. So when you ratify a treaty, then you become involved in a process of what's called rotational reporting. So we ratified the treaty in Canada in 2010. And in 2015, Canada submitted its first report on how we were meeting our obligations under the convention. That report goes to a committee of experts in Geneva. Those experts are chosen from countries around the world, 18 countries, or 18 experts are chosen for a 4-year period of time. And these are folks who are well acquainted with disability rights and human rights in general. And they receive these reports from all of the countries that have ratified the convention. And that's about 160 or 170 countries right now, so it's a lot. So countries report on how they're meeting their obligations. But the other thing, and the thing that's most important from the civil society side, is that there's a process called parallel reporting that allows civil society organizations, like L'Arche was involved last time around, and lots of others, Canadian Association of Community Living, CNIB, lots of groups were involved in Canada's parallel report in 2016. And the way that I described it, my own sort of shorthand, is that a government report tells the truth. But you can imagine when a government's going to report on how it's doing under a particular convention, they're going to share the good news. They're going to say, well, we've done this, we've done that, we've done another thing. And it's all true. They've done all those things. So they tell the truth, but they don't tell the whole truth. And the parallel report is the whole truth, or we try to make it the whole truth. So, I talk about an example in our 2015 report. One of the things that the Canadian government report talked about was the wonderfully accessible visa application process that's available for people with visual impairments who want to enter the country. But what they didn't talk about is that most people with disabilities who come to Canada are not allowed to stay, are not allowed to become citizens, because they're perceived to have a disproportionate burden on the healthcare system. So sure, yeah, you can come, just don't plan to stay. So that's the difference between the state report and the parallel report. And what happens with these is, the state report goes to Geneva, then the parallel report goes to Geneva, and then the government of Canada and a bunch of grumpy CSO people like me all show up in Geneva to talk with the committee about how we're implementing our obligations under the convention. And then the committee writes a report called the concluding observation, in which they say, Canada is doing grand stuff in these areas and commend the country for that. However, it may want to consider giving some more attention to other areas. So again, and I'll stop talking in a minute, I promise you. But one of the key things that came out of our first report was that there's some good stuff going on in Canada around disability, and we all feel that's the case. But one of the key things that the committee zeroed in on is a lack of an intersectional approach to an understanding of disability issues in the country. So since 2016, there has been a real focus in the disability rights community in Canada on issues of intersectionality. So we talk a lot about racialized people with disabilities. We talk about Indigenous people with disabilities. I would try to give some substance to the meaning of what it is for an Indigenous person with disability to realize their rights, okay? So that's an example of how I would say that the convention has an impact. It doesn't mean that an Indigenous person with a disability in Cape Breton can go to court and say, you're violating my right to equal access to education under the CRPD. Can't do that. But it does have the way of moving at government and focusing attention, okay?
Thank you so much, Steve, for that. And is it related to the, again, this is just, I'm very ignorant about this subject. So was it related to the CRPD that we had the visit from the special rapporteur for persons with disabilities a few years back? And I read the report, the letter that they wrote on, and it's available online, where they flagged MAID as a potential threat in an area to the rights of and lives of people with disabilities. Was that whole relationship with the special rapporteur part of being a part of ratifying the CRPD? And sorry, I'll just say I'm gonna just move off screen briefly. I just have to get some medication and I'll but I'm listening. I'll just be one moment.
You're asking about the relationship between the special rapporteur and the CRPD committee and the CRPD itself? Is that right?
Yeah, because I know the special rapporteur came and visited Canada and had lots of conversations with people. And if I understand correctly, that was outside of the parallel reporting process. And I was just curious, is that something that happens? Does the special rapporteur only come to countries who have signed the CRPD?
You're quite right. It is outside the parallel reporting process. It's a different thing altogether. The special rapporteur at the time, Catalina de Vindes, was a person like me who was involved with the drafting of the convention. So I've known Cata for a long time. But in the UN system, there are different mechanisms to get governments to pay attention to human rights. There are the human rights treaties, of which there are 7, I think. I could be corrected on this. I'm old, forgive me. But the core human rights treaties are the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and 2 covenants, one on economic, social, and cultural rights, and the other on civil and political rights. So those 3 things are kind of called, well, they're called in the UN system, the Bill of Human Rights. But beyond that, there are thematic treaties that focus on different populations. So there's a Convention on the Rights of the Child, there's a Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and there are other conventions, okay? The Disability Convention is the most recent of these, and it really took 20 years of work to get the UN to even think about drafting a convention. And interestingly, it was 20 years ago this year in Durban, South Africa, at an anti-racism conference, that the government of Mexico introduced a motion to get the UN General Assembly to consider drafting a disability convention. And that led to the creation of a thing called the Ad Hoc Committee. And that Ad Hoc Committee met for the first time in the summer of 2002 in New York City. And that committee met once or twice a year from 2002 to 2006. And when people talk about the drafting of the convention, that's what they're talking about, okay? So those meetings took place over a 2 or 3 week period in which all of the countries that were interested came to the UN in New York and sat in a big room and figured out what they wanted the convention to look like. It was a fascinating process to be involved with. I was involved as the human rights officer for Disabled Peoples International, which is a little NGO based in Canada, but had members, disability organizations all around the world. So DPI was there, but I was also the civil society advisor to the government of Canada during this time. Myself and a human rights lawyer from BC named Dulcie McCollum. And in any case, I'm just trying to frame this so it makes sense for you. And I wanted to say too, you say that you're ignorant about a lot of this stuff. And I think that the world is happier because most people are. It's pretty arcane stuff, and kind of dull in a lot of ways. I realize that. So I appreciate you bearing with me here. So we came together once or twice a year to draft a convention. And in the beginning, in 2002, there was a lot of resistance. A lot of countries didn't want a convention at all. Because, of course, a convention brings with it obligations. And obligations cost money. And governments are always loath to commit to further obligations and further expenditures. So a lot of governments were not keen about having a disability convention. But a lot of people like me from NGOs around the world also came to that meeting in 2002. And we really pushed, like we're pushing here today on this filibuster. We really pushed governments from around the world to say, hey, the time has come. We need to have this convention. So in the end, we were successful. And in 2006, after I think 8 meetings, this ad hoc committee, which by that time in 2006 was a room full of about probably 400 people, with countries, about 180 countries from around the world being represented there. And I think at the last meeting of the ad hoc committee in August of 2006, there were about 800 NGO representatives represented there. So I mean, you couldn't even get everybody in the same room. There were overflow rooms and things. But what happened with this stuff during the actual drafting is you'd go from, say, 2003, at the end of the meeting in 2003, we had a loose text. And from there was a working group struck in January of 2004. And that working group in 2004 was 40 delegations or 40 people. It was 26 state representatives, of which Canada was one, and 13 NGOs, of which DPI was one, so I was there, and one national human rights institution, like the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And NHRI, the National Human Rights Commission, were represented by the government or by the South African Human Rights Commission at that meeting by a woman named Charlotte McLean from South Africa. So we came up with a kind of a text, a working text for a convention, which modeled after other conventions. We looked at the Convention on the Rights of the Child, we looked at the CEDAW, we looked at them all, and what you do, I mean, there are basic human rights, right? There's the right to education, the right to health, the right to work, the right to life, huh? All of these rights exist. So what we did is we looked at those rights, those core rights in all areas, and we said, okay, this is how they look at it in the Children's Convention. This is how it's framed in the Convention for Women. This is how it's laid out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We looked at all of these documents, and we took that and said, okay, what does that mean for people with disabilities? So if you look at the right to education, it talks about the fact that people have a right to education on an equal basis with others. And it says, well, that means if you have visual impairment, then stuff has to be accessible for you. Or if you're deaf, you have sign language interpreter. Or if you have learning disability, you get other accommodations. So if you look at the substance of the convention, it gets into those details. Okay, and it says, this is how you realize the right to education for people with disabilities. So that's what makes the Disability Convention different than the other conventions, because for the first time in the UN system, they considered what it means for a person with a disability to have the same rights as other people and how you actually achieve that. So that's what the treaty does. So to go back to your original question about how the special rapporteur is connected to that. The special rapporteur on disability has been around for a long time. That office was created in the 1990s. And at that time, it was connected to a thing called the UN Standard Rules on the Equalization of Opportunities for People with Disabilities, or the Standard Rules for short. And the special rapporteur in those days helped countries use the standard rules to improve the situation for people with disabilities. There's a whole history around that I won't get into with you here today. But once the convention came into play in 2007, then there was a process that moved the office of the special rapporteur away from a focus on the standard rule and instead to a focus on the convention. And it just means to say that the special rapporteur takes as his reference point or her reference point the CRPD. So when CATA came and the special rapporteur came to Canada in the summer of 2018, I think, she traveled across the country She was in Toronto. She was in Montreal. She was in Fredericton, I think. She was in Halifax, and she was in Ottawa. And she met with government at all levels, federal, provincial, local. She met with disability advocates. She did things, she visited institutions. She did all these things. And at the end of that time, she wrote a report summarizing her observations. And interestingly, for our discussions here today, she wrote a report that included a long series of concerns connected to Canada's MAID regime. So even in those days, in 2018, before the horrors of C7, the UN was already expressing reservations and concerns about what was going on with medical assistance and dying in this country. Now, since that time, and since C7 has been picking up steam, there's a new special rapporteur. He took office in the summer of last year, and he's Professor Gerard Quinn, who is from Ireland, a professor of law at the University of Galway, or the National University of Ireland, which has a campus at Galway. And Gerard, like myself, was involved with the drafting of the convention as well. Anyway, a month ago, the special rapporteur on the rights of people with disabilities, Professor Quinn, along with the special rapporteur on the eradication of extreme poverty, whose name escapes me, Oliver something or other, and the person whose mandate connects to older people in the UN. So those three special rapporteurs, or three UN mandate holders, wrote the Prime Minister of Canada and said, excuse us, this bill C7, it's a stinker. We don't like it at all. And that sign language interpreter is brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. So they wrote and said this. And the government of Canada has yet to respond. No, I know that it's got their attention because I've talked to people in government about it and they're working on it. But it's a little bit lame to say we're working on a letter to respond while at the same time the Prime Minister is leading the charge to pass the bill 2 doors down in the House of Commons. You know, there are words for that I won't use, but they start with B and S. So, you know, at some point, the fact that we have signed this convention and we have ratified it, and the UN Special Rapporteur and other mandate holders in the system, and the CRPD committee itself, have all said, hey, you guys, what you're doing on MAID, it's dangerous stuff. That's going to come home to roost. So those folks in Ottawa and on their Zoom screens all around the country who consider themselves to be so wise that they can pass this sort of legislation will find out somewhere down the road that in fact, they don't act with impunity because, and this is what I said a little while ago, 20 years ago, Canada and other countries tried not to have a disability convention because they didn't want to be bound by these extraterritorial rules. but we are. So again, people will say, but it doesn't have the weight of law. And you're right, it doesn't have the weight of law. But Canada values its international reputation fairly highly, I believe. And I think that we as a country, all of us, have some feeling that human rights are important in this country. So if and when the UN comes back to the government of Canada and says, you're not meeting your human rights obligations, and Bill C-7, as the special rapporteur's letter said, puts you in violation not just of the CRPD, but also of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. 3 core UN human rights instruments are being violated by this instrument. And I'll tell you, it baffles me why and how parliamentarians and senators fail to realize this. I know they're aware of it because I've talked to them about it. I've spent the last number of weeks talking to many MPs and senators, and somehow, in some twisted form of logic, there's a sense that people with disabilities sometimes live lives of such pain and misery simply because of their disability that they ought to be allowed to end it. And I don't know about you, but that makes me profoundly sad.
It makes me.
So that's a pretty long answer. I'm sorry.
Please don't apologize, Steve. I really appreciate it. And I want to read and echo what Q said in the comments, which is that, well, I'll look back. So yeah, that we love getting this history. You make it less dull. You really animate it for us. And I deeply appreciate that. And I share your deep sadness. And I also have anger and grief and lots of other feelings. And I also share I don't know if this is a word, I share the bafflement, being baffled, yeah, by the thinking of politicians. I also wanted to apologize. Sorry, while I was taking my medication, it makes me cough a lot, so I didn't get to reassure you in the moment about how not boring it is. But the other thing I didn't get to tell you is that I have a visual impairment, so I need to take breaks from the screen. So sometimes I look away and maybe I appear bored, and I should have given you a warning about that. So I apologize. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of which question to ask you next. But one of the things, and this is what I was trying to conjure a name before, but since I moved back here to Unama'ki or Cape Breton, I've been really fortunate to become connected with the Wabanaki Council on Disability, and that's WABANAKI. And I've been learning a little bit about their founder, Wendell Nicholas, who was also involved with the CRPD. And I wonder if you had the pleasure of knowing and working with Wendell.
I knew Wendell. My recollection is that Wendell unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. Am I correct about that?
Yes.
Yeah, Wendell was involved to some degree with the drafting of the convention, participated in it, parts of some meetings, I think. And there were other Indigenous people with disabilities from around the world that were involved. People, a lot of Indigenous people from Australia and New Zealand were involved. There were Indigenous people from South America that were involved. But, you know, in Canada, as I said to you earlier, one of the key takeaways from our last, our first meeting with the CRPD committee in 2016 was our lack of focus and lack of attention to intersectional issues. And aside from Wendell and my friend Neil on the West Coast, who works with BCANs, I'm not aware of a lot of focus on the kind of intersection between Indigenous people and people with disabilities. I think that's changing, and I think that's a tremendously positive thing. And I think that it's something that we can use the CRPD for. There are references to Indigenous people in the preamble of the CRPD. There was an attempt to insert more text around Indigenous people with disabilities in the CRPD, and it didn't go anywhere. And I be honest with you, and I say, I don't remember the details around that right now, but I'm sure there are reasons. I remember there being a guy from an Indigenous disability organization in Australia, Damien Griffiths, was the executive director of an Indigenous disability organization in Australia. Damien participated in a number of the ad hoc committee meetings. There were also, there's a woman named Huhana Hickey, who is an Indigenous person from New Zealand, and Huhana, or Dr. Who, as she likes to be called. It's true, she has a PhD and she's Dr. Who. But she participated in a lot of the meetings. I remember in 2007, DPI, for whom I worked at the time, we organized our international World Assembly in Seoul, South Korea. About 2,000 or 3,000 people with disabilities from around the world came to that. And we had a specific session on Indigenous people with disabilities. There were workshops around that. And Hannah and Damien participated in those, they came to South Korea for those meetings. And there were also Indigenous people from the United States that participated. I don't remember whether Wendell came to South Korea or not. I don't think so. But he was certainly involved, and he certainly had the CRPD on his radar screen. I'm interested to know from you, you say you're working with these folks. I hadn't realized that they continued to be around after Wendell passed away. So are you doing work in the area around the convention?
Oh yeah, well, I do. I just want to give a big shout out to the Wabanaki Council on Disability, especially since you and I are both here in Mi'kma'ki. And yes, my own introduction to the group is through Rosie Sillaboy, who works in at Maui Dam in Waigama, and I'm trying to think of how to answer your question. I've just been getting to know people there, and actually my Rosie had just I think that she saw me my profound sadness and my being baffled on Facebook and asked me to join a meeting to talk to them about what we knew about Bill C-7. And, you know, like a lot of people have pointed out, sorry, my word retrieval is slow sometimes. But just the complete lack of consultation with Indigenous people with disabilities on Bill C-7. And so yes, the council is active, and they have a lot of different projects going on, including some work with Jordan's principle, and they're doing some research to make resources available around the traditional worldview and of disability in the nations and across the Wabanaki Confederacy. And they're also doing some work on Indigenous parasports. So I know that they're very much led by the vision of Wendell Nicholas, who, as you said, was involved in the creation of the CRPD. And but I'm not sure specifically what ongoing relationship they have with the CRPD. And they are, as Conrad Solis described to me, that it's an embryonic organization, that they are very much still growing. And
can I ask you another question? I'm not sure. I thought that Wendell's organization was based in New Brunswick. You say in Cape Breton. So tell people who are listening in what Wabanaki is. I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. So, and I'm not an expert, so I want to make sure. The Wabanaki Council on Disability takes its name from the Wabanaki Confederacy. And I'm gonna look in it. The Wabanaki Confederacy is a group of nations that are all over the East Coast and all the way to Quebec, but I'm actually pulling it up so that I can make sure I get that correct. But it includes the Mi'kmaq, the Maliseet, or Wolastoqey, the Passamaquoddy, and the Penobscot. And I apologize, I'm mispronouncing, but it does also extend into into the United States. So, you know, it of course exceeds our colonial borders, but yeah, so my understanding is that the Wabanaki Confederacy was really important to Wendell, and so this Council on Disability is inclusive of all these nations and quite a broad geographic area. Yeah, and including Newfoundland and Labrador as well. So a lot of diverse nations in the Wabanaki Council. And I wish that you were here to speak to it directly. So I apologize if I am missing important details in my retelling.
Yeah, as you're talking, I remember this, and I actually think at some point I've seen a map, and the territory extends down into Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire and things. So it's not any of the kind of traditional European boundaries at all. It's much larger than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is there an office of this organization somewhere? I think that would be fantastic to be in touch with them.
There is not yet a physical office. So I know the executive director is in Millbrook First Nation, and I'm trying to remember everybody's titles, but I know Rosie's here in Unama'ki, and I believe Conrad is actually right now maybe in Ontario. So everybody, and of course right now we have Zoom connecting us all. But no, they're very much in that kind of, as Conrad said, an embryonic state. So I think they're very much hoping to grow in that way. I'm trying to think what else I wanted to ask you. It's been a long, oh, sorry.
Hi, I just want to step in this natural pause because I think you said that your availability was until right about now. And I wanted to give you a moment, some time to take a break because I know you're back on again very shortly with Carmen after this segment with Stephen.
That's right. Thank you, Q. I think I will. I'll take a little screen break, but Steve, it's been such a pleasure to meet you, and I hope that we can connect more at a later date. And but I will listen in. I will listen to the ongoing conversation in the background. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and history with the CRPD.
Awesome. Thanks, Aslan. Hi,
Very
Steve.
nice to meet you too. Take care. Maybe I'll bump into you on the road here in Cape Breton.
Yes, excellent.